Like we said last time, we were talking about memory. This time we're talking about sharing data between scenes. And I think our conversation last time, Ed, had left off with I had said that somebody wanted to have, what do they say, persistent data between scenes, and you had said there's a difference between sharing data between scenes and persisting data between scenes. So
Yeah, it's the word persist which is the difference. You're right. We left off last time looking at example 6 dash or underbar memory, which was a discussion of different memory topics as related to Composer. And specifically, we finished off on example 5, which was something I can't remember at this point. But we were moving on to sharing data between scenes. And this all started with somebody asking us, how do I persist data? And so at that point, I was not sure if they meant share data between scenes or actually persist. And persisting data means that I have saved the data. It's stored somewhere. I like to call it on the disk because I'm still a PC guy. But persistent memory, basically the persistent storage on your device, be it the documents directory or perhaps the temporary directory. Although if you want to keep things persistently, the documents directory is the place to put it. And then later when the person starts up the app, they can reload that data even if they've quit the app or the app has crashed or whatever. And so that's what the persisting is. Persisting is that you can retrieve it at any time in the future versus sort of like this transient, it's stored in memory thing. So anyways, we can move on here. I want to show you a couple of examples. First, we will do memory sharing between scenes. That is, I will share data between scenes. So if you're following along, you can go into 6-memory, or underbar, I'm sorry, I keep saying dash, and load up the example. And when you load it, it will look like this. Make sure I'm showing my screen. I am. So you're going to see this list, and on the left side are white dots. Next to the white dots are little titles that tell you what the example is. And on the right side are buttons. So and everything is horizontally aligned. So scene 1, the white dot. What the white dots do is if I load a scene, the dot will turn green, which means that it's been created. And if I exit the scene, so in this case I'll click button 2, and that goes to scene 2, which then gets created, and the red dot here indicates that scene 1 has been destroyed. So going into, let's take a rewind here. In the initial instance when we talked about this, I created a template for creating standard Composer setups. That is a splash screen, a main menu, some other stuff. And in this template, it provided some settings. So if we look at main.lua in this particular project, we'll see that I've set up is debug equals true. So we're going to get debug messages from Composer. I've also set up, and this is the important flag for this example, recycle on scene change is set to true. And so what I'm doing here is I'm telling Composer, every time I change scenes, destroy the scene I'm leaving. And the reason I did that was because for memory purposes, I wanted to exacerbate the creation and destruction steps. So in other words, to clear memory as soon as possible so you could see something happening. All right, so scene 6 is where we're going to start. And Composer itself provides a method of sharing data between scenes. And what that is, let me find it here. Let me go ahead and reload the project. Run scene 6. When I run scene 6, what you're going to see is at the top is a little message that says last scene -1, count 0. So that's after I first load the app. What that's doing is if we look at the scene in the create, I will create a couple of labels. One is called last scene label, and another one that is called last count. So this one here, last scene label. This one is last count label. And then in the did enter scene method, that is, we've created the scene and we just finished entering the scene, I will ask Composer to get a variable called last seen, and if it doesn't find it, I will set the value to -1. So that's what we're doing right here. And then I will get the count. So I'll say get a count, and I'll say Composer get variable, and I'm looking for a variable named count. Again, if I don't find it, I set it to 0. So as you can see in the example when we run it, this bit of code here is run. I then immediately store the scene number, and I'll show you where that's defined. And I store the count, but before I store the count, I increment it. So if we do this, just examine the count. I get the count, it'll initially be 0. I add 1 to it, and then I tell the Composer, store this variable, set this variable, count, to whatever I pass here, which is count plus 1. So scene number, just for those following, is defined at the very top of the file. Every one of these files has a local variable called scene num. And we talked about this last week, but I use it basically to show you what scene you're in. So every file uses this value. Let me find it. And create method, and it basically creates a little label in the upper right corner, so we know what scene we're in. It's just a nice way for people following along to know that this is in fact changing to scene 2 or scene 6. But I figured, since I already had it defined, that I might as well incorporate it as part of this example. So, sorry, let's just do it again real fast. The first time this runs, I get the variable last seen. If it's not found, I set it to -1. Then a little bit further down, I simply force it to be whatever that local variable is, which in this case is 6. Now I know that some people listening will say, well, there's another way to get the last scene. There's a Composer function which will tell you what the current scene you are in is, or the last scene. But it's a little bit different. What that tells you is the actual file name of the scene that you previously loaded or you are currently in. So that's not what I'm trying to cover here. So without going on and on here, the critical part of this is the Composer basically says, or provides you these functions, get variable and set variable. And you can get and set any named variable that you want. And if we demonstrate this properly, I will load 6. The last scene is -1, as demonstrated here. And then I will load scene 7. Scene 7 is exactly the same as scene 6, does the same stuff. Gets the variable. If it can't find it, it sets it to -1. Gets the count. If it can't find it, it sets it to 0. However, in scene 6, I set these variables. So now when I click on scene 7, what we should see is last scene 6, count 1, which is what we get. And then I can just go back and forth. And every time I go back and forth, it increments count. And in that scene, it sets the scene number to whatever it was as defined at the top of the file.
So just to make sure I'm clear, what we're seeing there then is that that those values are shared between the two scenes because you set them in one scene and then you get them in the other.
Right. Basically what I'm doing, or what's happening here, yes, is Composer is set up to let us create variables somewhere that it manages and then retrieve them at a later time. So we don't have to have variables set in our files. We could simply do what I did down here, which is set this variable, and then some other time when I need it, I could make a variable like compose, if I can type. This is what happens when you offset your fingers on the keyboard. A more practical example would be, let's say I had a level, and right before it exited, I wanted to save the score. And let's say I was saving the score in some variable somewhere else in my file. So I could save last score, and let's pretend that I have a variable called last score defined somewhere else in this file. It'll take the value out of that variable and store it. And now any other Composer scene after this can simply do
Which is great because I mean, if you've already pulled, like, let's say that you were running an application that pulls data out of a database or something, and you were using it in one scene, and then you wanted to go to another scene, like maybe add a form or something like that. You wanted to pre-pop the form with information, but you didn't want to go back to the database again to get the information because you'd already grabbed it. Then you could just pass it across to the second scene and pre-pop the form.
Yeah, this is a very uncomplicated, simple method of sharing data between scenes. Now I want to show you another example, which is 8 and 9. This becomes unwieldy once you have lots and lots of data to share, and there's better ways to do it. So I would suggest this to people who have like 3 or 4 variables that they want to share, like maybe like a lives counter and a score counter, and they need it all over the place. Then that's great. This is the easy way to do it. It's straightforward, and you can be guaranteed that it will work.